Good afternoon, everyone. Good evening, rather. I was just on a plane about 45 minutes ago, and I was musing with someone earlier about how I'd lost track of which time zone I was in earlier, and that I was really hoping I would be here on time, and it's really good to be here. Let me just tell you, you don't know what I went through. I was laughing, saying that these 2-a-days that we do from time to time, 2 or 3-a-days in different places, they work really well, I think, when you're Obama, because you can clear air traffic and do all sorts of things. But when you're flying coach and you're just on the, in the back of the plane doing what normal people do, you can't move any faster, and they don't seem to recognize that you have to go and meet with folks. But in any case, let me just start by acknowledging the National Capital Planning Commission and all that you do. Our friends there, Preston and Julia and everybody else, we've enjoyed. Really, you're our cousins, and we get to work with you closely on all of these regional projects, so we're very excited to have been able to spend more time with you over the last year. The first, I guess I'll run this. Here we go. First of all, let me just ask. The room seems really kind of dead. I feel the vibration is really low in here. Is everybody okay? Are we good? I mean, I know it's the end of the day, and I'm going to speed through this, but let's bring some energy. There is one of the better practices of regional innovation clusters and collaboration is vibration and energy. So we need to raise that up so that we can seize the moment. So let me start by just talking about this slide here, which is really to say that in the State of the Union address, President Obama said how important it is for America to win the future. And as he put it, we know what it takes to compete for the jobs and industries of our time, but we need to out-innovate, out-educate, and out-build the rest of the world. A major focus of the President's Win the Future strategy centers on enhancing regional economic competitiveness by helping our regions, both urban and rural, compete very well in the global dynamics. And that means creating economic ecosystems, which are these sort of mixes of public and private partners from a broad interdisciplinary background, whether it is venture money or if it's capital or if it's local government or if it's philanthropy, that these all have a role to play in this ecosystem, and that supports the sort of innovation and entrepreneurship that underlies clusters and that help them to flourish. The administration has wholeheartedly embraced regional innovation clusters, or RICs as they're called, as a new framework for structuring the nation's economic development activities. And I'll kind of go off note to say that the framework under which we are focusing on RICs has to do with a comparison between what we call 20th century economic development, which was more about local economies competing for businesses and competing against each other, to the 21st century model, which says, look, we're all on the same team. We may have unique differences, and we do have to thrive as a municipality, but the neighboring municipality is actually a member of a team that will form to compete against the worthy competitors that are actually in the global marketplace across the pond. And so the Obama administration realizes that. Obama said that the regions are the building blocks of America. And if we want America to really prosper, then we've got to figure out the way to actually cause the regions to prosper organically, and to prosper in an authentic way that is related to what their true strengths are, not about what the latest, hottest industries are, nanotech for nanotech's sake, as opposed to nanotech because we have the anchor institutions and the knowledge base and the people base that can really drive a nanotech economy. And so the administration is really focused on the President's budget, the 2012 budget, which calls for $40 million for a regional innovation program within EDA at Commerce, and sponsors a nationwide competition for development and implementation strategies that will build on regional industry strengths and innovation assets to drive regional growth. And related proposals would increase investment in scientific research and development, support entrepreneurship, continue the research and experimentation tax credit, and provide $100 million to train new science, technology, engineering, and mathematics teachers. Next slide. moving a little slow there. A regional cluster. So one of the things that, as we began working on the St. E's cluster project, we all agreed that lexicon was really important, that we all sort of spoke the same language. If you ask 100 people what a regional innovation cluster is, you'll probably get 75 different answers. And so we thought it was really important to begin to agree on a definition. And the one that we're using this is what I call our policy definition, but there's also a plain speak definition that we're working on too. But it says basically that the cluster is a geographically bound active network of similar synergistic complementary organizations in a sector or industry that leverages the unique strengths of that place. And essentially what that is saying is that it's about a collection of public and private participants. It's the range of folks that I just named earlier, from industry to the suppliers of industry, to the technical colleges and four-year colleges and workforce investment organizations. It is also philanthropy, has an increasing role, as Dr. Chris Gabriel here in the front row will share later in the panel, I'm sure. But it's also about local government and state government and also federal government all coming together to support the unique strengths of that region. And so the federal government has some key roles to play, we say, in advancing region-based economic development. And so a few of those are listed. One is that we can advance a common framework that ensures better alignment of programs and resources in a fiscally austere environment. And secondly, the federal government invests in locally generated ideas and initiatives that are capable of spurring regional economic growth and job growth. Third, the federal government plays an important role as a convener or relevant partners that may not naturally self-convene to help encourage regional development. So here's an opportunity to really make an important point, which is that this regional innovation cluster concept is what we call an all-hands-on-deck proposition. It's about imagining almost like there's a single boat, and everybody in your economy or region is in that boat. And the way forward, the winning plan or strategy, will come about as a result of inputs from a variety of people with a variety of backgrounds, some unusual or not usually at the table. But it's also about the unusual voice being at the table. And so what we like to say is that the federal government has this role to play because we can cause, or we have probably an ease of getting people to the table who might not normally convene. And we have some very interesting examples of folks not convening, and the reasons why they're not convening will just knock your socks off. So imagine that two neighboring towns won't convene because somebody stole a basketball game from them 20 years ago in a fake call or something, or a referee. I mean, they're really kind of interesting human, cultural, kind of superficial reasons that people don't necessarily convene, but they're important. It's important to overcome those things, and we believe we have a role to play to bring folks together. And then I guess the other reason that the federal government, that the role that we play is that we have a critical role in investing smarter and more efficiently to foster these economic opportunities. So what does it mean to invest smarter? What I like to say there is that historically the federal government has done whatever the federal government does. If you look at the departments, they're expert at what they do: energy, commerce, education, and labor. But the president has very wisely identified that the silos that have normally existed between the federal government agencies must come down in order for us to actually deploy money smartly. And so that means we now come together to see how is it that we can link, align, and leverage our resources in a way that results in smarter investment, quicker, smarter, more responsive investment. That's what this is all about. And the other thing that's not up here that I ultimately think is probably the biggest thing that the federal government can do is to be a listener. When we roll into town, at these various places, large and small, sometimes people expect that we're coming with the answer. And I don't think it's about the answer. I think it's about coming with resources to support the answer. And to also realize that the federal government has a lot of innovating to do itself if it's in fact to be a real partner to innovation in the regions. The idea is that we've been here forever. We're doing a lot of things the way we've been doing them for a really long time. And so there's a call for us to innovate, and that's what knocking these silos down is about. Now, this slide really speaks about sort of the collection of the involved that I talked about, the all-hands proposition. Many communities and states are moving towards this cluster framework for economic development because it is proved to have a high yield, high return on investment. But here's what, this is a very, by the way, simplified graphic to show all of what is involved. So at the center of it all is really the industries that will drive innovation, job creation. They're both new company startups and also expansions of existing companies and startups. But you can see in this kind of axle, this sort of spoked dynamic here, that they require workforce development, they require capital, they require policy and funding from the government, state, local, and federal, labor organizations, infrastructure. All of those investments are really key. The community colleges and nonprofits all come together in this kind of unique dynamic. And the reality of it is I envision one day that we will put together the full scope of what this looks like and really sort of dive a little deeper into what all of these buttons hold. And you would see a mass cacophony of all kinds of folks coming together, public and private organizations, large and small, the ones that are typically at the table and those that typically are not at the table. So the reason that folks are moving towards clusters are, again, because of the high ROI, and these are just some of the dynamics that are typically associated with regional clusters. There's a lot of empirical evidence, some in the United States and some abroad. Creates jobs, business formation gets amped up, business expansion, fosters competitiveness. There's lots of evidence about the export dynamics of clusters, of companies that are involved in clusters, the ability to actually attract new populations, to attract new businesses, to attract thought leaders in the creative class, all are related to this. And here's what's very interesting. So I'm a delegate for the administration to the OECD, and I'm vice chair of a body called the Territory Development Policy Committee, and it's essentially a regional policy committee. And sitting around the table with folks from 40 countries, it's staggering to see that the wake-up call that we've gotten is the same wake-up call that all of these countries, large and small, have gotten. And it's interesting to see the degree to which they're responding. And what I always come back with is a renewed sense that we have really got to get on our P's and Q's and take this stuff seriously. If you look at Brazil, if you look at India, if you look at China, if you look at a variety of countries, Germany and its double-digit GDP, it's linked to exactly these principles about taking this super collaborative approach to doing economic development, investing heavily in innovation, investing heavily in education, investing heavily in entrepreneurship, and encouraging it both with funding and policies. Really, really important. And what I would like to say, rather than kind of digging into this, let me just say that there are lots of examples of clusters. This was an example of one that we had funded, by the way, from EDA, and I've just messed the slide up. Sorry about that. It was, okay. So basically, this was just going to be an example of clusters. So we're all familiar with the clusters in Silicon Valley. We're all familiar with the clusters in Boston on Route 128, the clusters that exist in North Carolina, and Research Triangle Park. But what we're finding, and what you probably know, is that there are clusters all over. There are industry clusters all over the United States. In fact, there are hundreds of them. And so it's very interesting as we invest that we find some really interesting clusters that you don't even think about. Duluth, Minnesota, for example, an aviation cluster. EDA invested $4.5 million in this cluster. Targeted investment in hard and soft infrastructure. And really, we provided kind of the seed capital, if you will. I mean, that's the role that the federal government can play when we say smart investments, about looking at ways that we can actually go in and support either the planning or implementation of these ecosystems from which jobs can be created. And the outcomes from a project such as this, enhanced competitiveness, high-wage jobs, entrepreneurial opportunities, and catalysts for regional collaboration. We are investing in a project called the mapping of the national mapping of clusters in the United States. And we're partnered with a consortium of universities led by Harvard and Michael Porter. And the goal of that project is to actually create the U.S.'s first comprehensive map of existing clusters, and to also look at where they are in their life cycle, whether they're early stage in developing, or whether they're mature and in need of transformation, or whether they're dying clusters. And the relevance of that is that when, one, it helps the local practitioners understand where they are and what they're involved in. It also identifies the assets that could be leveraged to create additional clusters, and it also allows us to partner clusters together so that they can actually advance their discoveries and lower their barriers by partnering together. So if we got two clusters, say a manufacturing cluster in Los Angeles and a manufacturing cluster in New York, they can pool resources, share information, share best and worst practices to advance both of their causes without both investing redundantly in those activities. Well, this is just a slide that basically shows who the contacts are from the EDA perspective. We have 6 regional offices that support the nation, and the office that actually supports the DC, Maryland, Virginia economies is based in the Philadelphia office, and these are actually the contacts. But I will close by saying this, that we're in tremendous times of challenge, but I like to say that out of challenge comes great opportunities. The greatest advances usually come out of some sort of trouble and some sort of hard work or some kind of stress or trauma. And so I believe that we're in a place where we can actually do some amazing things. The EDA really believes that the regional clusters is the framework that allows us to really harness the strengths of who we are. And it's about understanding this, what I call kind of the super inclusion concept again, where we talked about everyone kind of being on one boat. And if you think about the members of your community that typically are or are not involved, you think of folks having, historically folks are thought of as either having some clear contribution to make or others not having a clear contribution. The reality is that everyone has a clear contribution because everyone has the potential to contribute something. And if people are not engaged, then they're what I call the disengaged. And the disengaged are costly for economies. And so I think this is all about a call to super engagement. It's about understanding who and what you are. There's an interesting program that we funded at EDA called Know Your Region that I would encourage anyone who's interested in understanding the basics of regional clusters and understanding what underlies a strong regional economy to actually go online to eda.gov and look at that. We are funding a number of other things that would be tools that would be very useful for folks to begin to understand how this paradigm works. And with that, I will thank everyone again for listening and say that we have lots of exciting work that we will apply these concepts to with St. E's, with a very able team. I see Sakina and all sorts of folks and folks all around who are really engaged in that effort, and great things we expect to come out of that because we've set the intention. And we are channeling our resources in a coordinated, linked, leveraged way with specific outcomes. And I will say one last thing in part, which is that we have to have very high performance metrics associated with these plans that we're developing, because you get what you measure, as it said. And what has happened historically is that we don't really hold ourselves to very high standards of outcome. But if we know what it is that we're expecting to deliver, and we create the metrics that relate to those, then we will author and we will work to those outcomes. So thank you, and let's do the panel.
Barry, if you could just stay for one quick question, and then we'll bring up the next panelist. You talked about some barriers to collaboration. You gave an example of maybe two communities that don't play as nice as they might. And you talked about some of the other regions that you've been working in, sort of planting these seeds around the country. Talk maybe just a little bit about what might be some opportunities or some challenges in the National Capital Region, Federal, District of Columbia, 2 states, multiple jurisdictions. Have you come across any examples or ideas that you think might help us think through how to do a multi-jurisdictional, multi-state partnership around some of these clusters? Just if you could give a quick response or two to that.
Yep, I think it begins with intention and a willingness to forget the past. I mean, it really begins with that, because whether someone has historically been, very engaged or not, or whether they have been the ones who have had all of the talent and the resources, that's no longer the issue. The issue is that you get to the table and you have to identify that if you are all to come up together, you have to ask yourself, how do we all, what is it that we or this jurisdiction uniquely brings? What are our strengths? And if you take that sort of assessment, you must always find that there's something one has that the other doesn't have, or one has an advantage that the other doesn't have, and when you put those together, they work well. So from this particular region, I think there's some standing beliefs about the other jurisdictions that I think we would do well to leave behind, is the first thing I would say in a diplomatic way. And then the second is, I think, that those of us who have not been in the forefront necessarily can't be shy. You got to step up and be sort of present and say, I want to be at the table, I want to find my way. We're not all in the same place on the learning curve, and that's okay as well. But then it means that those who are higher up in the learning curve have to take a different approach and a different view of those who are not. Right? It's not about a competition between, it's all of us coming together. So I think it really is about that, just about being open and actually sitting at the table. The other thing I would say is that convening is not just getting together. And this is one of the things that we find, that what comes out of the process will be affected by the degree to which you believe convening and collaborating is just coming together versus actually having a transformation of how you see yourself and the others. That's really important. So that you can you actually look at someone across the table who doesn't have the PhD that you have and say, this person's important and matters. And the person may not be typically a leader in the economy for whatever the subject is, but can you actually listen and hear the other?
Okay. Well, thank you so much. Does everybody